I woke up in the hospital to the smell of smoke and antiseptic. My son, Daniel, was crying by my bedside, his face streaked with soot and tears. He told me I'd left the stoves on, that our house, the house I'd lived in for 40 years, had burned to the ground. They said I had a concussion from a fall and that my memory of the event was gone. Guilt consumed me for weeks, a heavy, suffocating blanket I couldn't throw off. It wasn't until I began sorting through the few salvaged, smoke-damaged things that my life truly shattered. In the melted, warped casing of the little security camera I kept on my dresser, I found something they hadn't noticed: the tiny, heat-discolored memory card. And on it was a crystal-clear recording of my son and his wife, a gas can in their hands, methodically pouring gasoline all over the floral curtains in my bedroom. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. My first coherent thought in that hospital bed was of my husband, Frank. For a fleeting second, I expected to see him sitting in the visitor's chair, doing the crossword from the newspaper, and looking up over his reading glasses to give me a wink. Then reality, cold and sharp, rushed back in. Frank had been gone for 3 years. It was just me and my memories in that big old house. A house that, apparently, was now a pile of ash and charred timber because of me. Mom, can you hear me? Daniel's voice was strained, thick with a kind of grief I'd never heard from him before. He squeezed my hand, his knuckles white. Beside him stood his wife, Tiffany. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was a stark contrast to her tear-smudged mascara. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a movie scene, playing the part of the dutiful, devastated daughter-in-law. Daniel, can you hear me? My throat felt like I'd swallowed a fistful of sand. What happened? He recounted the story, a tale that would become the official narrative for weeks to come. I'd been cooking. I must have gotten distracted, left a dish towel too close to the burner. A classic kitchen fire. He and Tiffany had just been pulling into the driveway to take me out for my birthday dinner when they saw the smoke. Daniel was the hero, of course. He'd rushed inside, braving the flames to pull me out of the smoke-filled hallway. I'd fallen, he said, and hit my head. That's why I couldn't remember. The doctors confirmed it. Post-traumatic amnesia, a kind-faced physician told me. It's quite common with head injuries. The memories may or may not return, Elaine. The important thing is that you're safe. Safe. I didn't feel safe. I felt unmoored, adrift in a sea of guilt. The home Frank and I had built, the place where we'd raised Daniel, where every wall held a picture, every scuff on the floor told a story. I had destroyed it. How could I have been so careless? I'm 67, not a child. I've cooked thousands of meals in that kitchen. The thought that I could have made such a foolish, catastrophic mistake ate away at me, hollowing me out from the inside. Daniel and Tiffany were angels. Everyone said so. They insisted I move in with them, of course. Their pristine, minimalist townhome was a world away from my cozy, cluttered colonial. Everything was white or gray or beige. There were no photographs on the walls, just abstract art that looked like a paint store had exploded. It felt cold, sterile, and entirely temporary. They gave me their guest room, a small space with a window that looked out onto their neighbor's stucco wall. "We'll get you back on your feet, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing," Daniel would say, patting my arm with a practiced gentleness. Tiffany would set a tray of food in front of me, usually something healthy and flavorless like steamed kale and quinoa. "You need to rebuild your strength, Elaine," she'd chirp, her voice a little too bright. "We've got everything under control." They certainly did. They took over everything. They handled the insurance claim, their conversations with the adjuster always happening in hushed tones behind a closed office door. They bought me new clothes, essentials they picked out themselves, mostly drab, shapeless things in colors like greige and oatmeal. I felt like I was fading into their decor. They managed my medication, doling out my pills in a little plastic organizer. Tiffany insisted it was to make things easier for me, given my memory issues. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of waking up in a strange bed, eating food that tasted like nothing, and watching daytime television with the volume turned down low. My friends would call, their voices full of pity. "Oh, Elaine, you poor thing. How are you holding up? Is there anything we can do?" What could I say? That I felt like a ghost haunting my own life? That the guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe? I'd just mumble something about being grateful for Daniel and Tiffany and that I was taking it one day at a time. That's what people say, isn't it?
The only time I felt a spark of my old self was when the insurance agent said they'd be sifting through the wreckage to see if anything was salvageable. Not much will have survived that blaze. The agent, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, told us over the phone while I sat on the couch pretending to read a magazine. Tiffany had the call on speaker. It was a total loss for the most part, but we have a crew that will go through room by room. "Just be careful," Tiffany said, her voice laced with concern. "My mother-in-law had so many precious things. It's all just so tragic." A fierce, protective feeling flared in my chest. My precious things. Frank's collection of modeled trains we'd set up in the basement every Christmas. The box of Daniel's childhood drawings I kept in the top of my closet. My mother's china, carried across the ocean from Ireland. A lump formed in my throat. I had burned it all. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. The call from the salvage company came about a week later. They had a few boxes of items they'd recovered from the master bedroom, which had apparently suffered more smoke and water damage than direct fire in some spots. The fire, they explained, seemed to have started and concentrated its fury at the back of the house, near the kitchen, just as Daniel had said. Daniel drove me to the storage unit where they'd taken the boxes. He seemed on edge the whole drive over, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "Mom, are you sure you're up for this? It might be upsetting." "I need to see Daniel," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in weeks. "It's all I have left." The storage unit was one of those cold concrete cubes that smelled of dust and mildew. Inside were 3 large cardboard boxes, crusted with soot. A wave of nausea hit me as the acrid smell of the fire, my fire, filled my nostrils. Daniel put a hand on my shoulder. "Okay, Mom, let's just take a quick look." But I didn't want a quick look. I wanted to touch my life again. The first 2 boxes were a heartbreaking soup of waterlogged books, melted jewelry boxes, and clothes that were now just gray, brittle rags. I saw the singed cover of Goodnight Moon, the book I read to Daniel every single night for 5 years, and the tears I'd been holding back finally came. I sat on the cold concrete floor and wept, not just for the loss of things, but for the loss of the person I used to be, a competent woman who didn't burn her own house down. He was uncomfortable. He kept checking his watch. "Come on, Mom, there's nothing here but junk. Let's go." "No," I said, wiping my eyes on my sleeve. "One more box." He sighed, the sound echoing in the small space. It was a sigh of impatience, not sympathy. For the first time, a tiny crack appeared in the facade of my perfect, caring son. The 3rd box was mostly from my dresser. The heavy oak must have protected the contents from the worst of the flames. I pulled out a handful of scarves, damp and smelling of smoke, but intact. And then I saw it. A melted lump of black plastic, vaguely rectangular. It was the little security camera I kept on my dresser. I'd bought it a few months after Frank passed, just for peace of mind. It didn't record to the cloud or anything fancy like that. It just stored video on a little SD card. I mainly used it to check on my cat, Patches, when I was out for the day. Patches. My heart clenched. They'd found his body near the back door. The vet said it was smoke inhalation, another casualty of my carelessness. I stared at the melted camera. It looked useless, a piece of trash. Tiffany would have thrown it out without a second thought. But as I turned it over in my hands, a corner of the plastic casing flaked off, and I saw a tiny sliver of metal. My heart started to beat a little faster. With my fingernail, I picked at the warped plastic. It was brittle and came away in black chunks. Daniel was busy texting, his back to me. "Almost done, Mom?" he asked, not looking up. "Almost," I whispered. And then I saw it. The little slot for the memory card. The card itself seemed fused in place, but it was there. It was discolored from the heat, the label peeling off, but it looked whole. It was a long shot, but what if? What if the camera had been recording? It was motion activated. Maybe it recorded something innocuous, like Patches jumping on the dresser. Maybe it would show me walking out of the room, leaving a towel on the stove, and I'd finally have the proof my scattered brain needed to accept what I'd done. My hands trembled as I worked the tiny card free. It was hot to the touch, even now. I slipped it into the pocket of my drab, Tiffany-approved cardigan, my fingers closing around it. It felt like a secret. The first secret I'd had in a month.
"Okay, honey," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm ready. There's nothing else here." He turned around, relief flooding his face. "Great. Let's get you home. Tiffany's making salmon cakes." I forced a smile. Salmon cakes. Lucky me. As we walked out of the storage unit, the little memory card felt like a 50-pound weight in my pocket. I had no idea then that it wasn't a weight, but a key. A key that was about to unlock a truth so ugly, so monstrous, it would make the fire feel like a minor inconvenience. I had no idea that I wasn't a forgetful old woman who'd lost her home. I was a victim, and the villains of my story were driving me home to feed me dinner. That car ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's ridiculously oversized SUV, clutching my purse on my lap with the little memory card nestled safely inside. I could feel its sharp edges through the thin fabric of my pocket. It was both a terrifying and a thrilling sensation. On the outside, I was the same fragile, slightly befuddled mother he'd been taking care of for the last month. I leaned my head against the window, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe evenly. But on the inside, a storm was gathering. My mind was racing. Every little thing about my son suddenly seemed different. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles a little too white, the quick sideways glance he shot at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Was that concern on his face, or was it something else? Assessment? Annoyance? Before, I would have interpreted it as love. Now I wasn't so sure. "Tired, Mom?" he asked, his voice smooth as butter. "Exhausted, honey," I mumbled, not opening my eyes. "It was a lot. I told you we didn't have to go today. There's no rush." Oh, but there is, I thought. There's a tremendous rush. Back in the beige box they called a home, Tiffany had a bland meal waiting. As I picked at the dry salmon cakes and limp asparagus, I tried to figure out a plan. How on earth was I going to view the contents of that card? My old laptop was a puddle of melted plastic. I hadn't owned a proper desktop computer in years. Daniel and Tiffany had a sleek silver laptop that usually sat on their kitchen island, but one of them was always around. Tiffany worked from home, doing some sort of social media consulting that seemed to involve a lot of scrolling on her phone and taking pictures of her lunch. My first attempt was a clumsy failure. The next morning, I found the laptop unattended while Tiffany was in the shower. My hands were shaking so much I could barely get the card out of my pocket. I looked at the side of the impossibly thin laptop. There was no little slot for a memory card. Of course there wasn't. Modern things were too streamlined for that. It probably needed some sort of special adapter, a doohickey I didn't have and wouldn't know how to ask for without raising suspicion. Just as I was turning the laptop over in my hands, Tiffany walked into the room, wrapped in a fluffy white towel. "Oh, Elaine, you're up early," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "Were you looking for something online? I can help you with that after my call." She gracefully plucked the laptop from my hands and set it back on the counter, positioning it just so. The message was clear. This is not for you. I felt a flash of hot anger, but I pushed it down, replacing it with the mask of benign confusion I was learning to wear so well. "Oh dear, I was just going to look at some pictures of flower gardens, for inspiration." "That's a lovely idea. We'll do that later." Of course, later never came. They were experts at managing me with vague promises. I realized they had constructed a very comfortable, very secure prison for me. They controlled my food, my clothes, my schedule, and my access to the outside world. Anyone who called had to go through them first. Any appointment I needed, they drove me. They had isolated me completely, all under the guise of loving care. They probably thought my brain was so scrambled from the concussion that I didn't notice. In a way, the amnesia they believed I had was my greatest weapon. They underestimated me, and that was going to be their biggest mistake. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. My mind went to my friends, to my weekly bridge group, the anchor from my last 20 years, the one constant in my life, especially after Frank passed. My sharpest friend, Carl, was a retired IT professional. If anyone had a doohickey that could read this card, it would be Carl. But how could I get to her? I couldn't just call her up. Tiffany always seemed to be listening. The plan started to form a few days later. I began to act a little more listless, a bit more depressed. I'd sigh dramatically while staring out the window. I'd push my food around my plate even more than usual. I was playing the part of a woman sinking into despair, losing her will. It worked. I could see the flicker of concern in Daniel's eyes. This time, I think it was genuine. Not concern for my well-being, but concern that his new living situation might become more of a hassle than he'd bargained for.
Finally, after a particularly dramatic sigh fest during a commercial break for a soap opera, he took the bait. "Mom, what's wrong? You seem so down these last few days." I let a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't hard to summon. "I just miss my life," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I feel so useless. I miss my friends. I miss feeling like myself." Tiffany, who had been on her phone, looked up. "Well, of course you do. That's perfectly natural after what you've been through." Her tone was patronizing, like she was explaining gravity to a toddler. This was my opening. I was thinking, I know it's a lot to ask, but my old bridge game is on Wednesdays at the community center, just for a couple of hours, to see Carol and Marge and the girls, to feel normal again, you know? I looked up at him, letting my eyes get watery and pathetic. I hated doing it, but I was a mother. I knew exactly which buttons to push. Daniel and Tiffany exchanged a look. I could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken them aloud. Is she well enough? Is it a good idea? Is it a pain in the neck for us to arrange? Tiffany's expression clearly said the latter. "I don't know, Mom," Daniel started. "It might be too much stimulation for you." "I'll drive her," Tiffany suddenly chirped, and I realized her calculation had changed. It was an opportunity to show off. She could drop me off and tell all my friends what a devoted daughter-in-law she was, how she was taking such good care of me in my time of need. The martyr points were too good to pass up. "Oh, thank you, sweetie. Oh, I just don't know what I'd do without you." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Wednesday couldn't come soon enough. Tiffany dressed me in another one of her beige-colored outfits. I felt like a sack of potatoes, but it didn't matter. As we drove to the community center, I clutched my purse, the memory card feeling like a burning coal inside it. The plan was simple. I'd told my friend Carol over a brief, whispered phone call from the guest bathroom that I desperately needed to talk to her alone. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll handle it." That's Carol for you, reliable as sunrise. When we walked into the rec room, the familiar sound of laughter and shuffling cards was like a balm to my soul. My friends all rushed over, hugging me, telling me how glad they were to see me up and about. Tiffany stood by, soaking it all in with a benevolent smile. After about an hour of painfully bad bridge playing on my part, I was too nervous to focus. Carol clapped her hands together. "Okay, ladies, that's enough for me today. Elaine, you look beat. Let me drive you home so this lovely young lady doesn't have to cut her day short." She winked at Tiffany. "We old folks need to stick together." Tiffany looked momentarily flustered, her plans of a grand, dutiful departure foiled, but refusing would look churlish. "Oh, well, if you're sure, Carol, it's no trouble at all for me." "Nonsense," Carol boomed, linking her arm through mine. "I haven't had a chance to really catch up with Elaine yet. We'll take the scenic route." The relief I felt as I slid into the passenger seat of Carol's old, comfortable Buick was immeasurable. I was free, if only for an hour. "All right, Elaine, what's this all about?" Carol said as soon as we were out of the parking lot. She didn't head toward Daniel's neighborhood. She headed toward her own quiet little condo. My hands trembled as I pulled the scorched memory card from my purse. I told her everything. The fire, the memory loss, Daniel and Tiffany's smothering care, the lump of melted plastic, and the discovery. I told her about the unease that had been growing inside me, the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She listened, her expression growing more and more grim. Carol has a world-class poker face from 40 years of bridge, but she couldn't hide the outrage in her eyes. When I finished, she just said, "Okay, let's see what's on this damn thing." At her house, she pulled out a dusty box labeled computer guts and produced a multi-card reader. She plugged it into her old desktop computer, her movements efficient and sure. "It's a long shot, hun. The heat could have corrupted the whole file." She inserted the card, the computer made a little bing-bong sound. A new drive appeared on her screen. My breath caught in my throat. She clicked it open. There was one video file, just one. The file name was a jumble of numbers, the date and time. I looked at the date, the night of the fire. The timestamp was 9:17 p.m., the exact time Daniel had said they were pulling into the driveway to take me to dinner. Carol's hand hovered over the mouse. "Are you ready?" I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. She double-clicked. The media player opened, and the screen filled with the familiar, static view from my bedroom dresser. I saw my floral bedspread, the corner of my vanity, the doorway. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of my bedside lamp. I felt a pang of loss so sharp it almost made me gasp. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the bedroom door creaked open.
It was Daniel. His face, illuminated by the hall light, was a mask of grim concentration I'd never seen before. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicked. He looked like a man on a mission. A few seconds later, Tiffany appeared behind him, her movements quick and furtive. She was carrying a red 5-gallon gas can. My hand flew to my mouth. Carol let out a low whistle. The audio was clear. "Just by the curtains and along the back wall, like we talked about," Tiffany whispered, her voice sharp. "It has to look like it started from an electrical socket." "I know what I'm doing," Daniel hissed back. "Did you turn off the main smoke detector?" "An hour ago. Said I was changing the battery for her." I watched, frozen in horror, as my son, my child, the boy I raised, unscrewed the cap and began methodically pouring a stream of gasoline onto the floorboards, soaking the rug and the base of my curtains, the curtains my mother had helped me pick out. Tiffany directed him with little hand gestures, a conductor of our little symphony of destruction. My mind couldn't process it.
It was like watching a movie starring strangers who happened to look exactly like my son and his wife. This couldn't be real. And yet, the evidence was right there, playing out in full color on a computer screen in my friend's quiet living room. The guilt, the shame, the confusion I had been living with for a month evaporated in an instant, replaced by a feeling I had never experienced before. It was a cold, pure, diamond-hard rage. The fire hadn't just taken my home. It had been meant to take my life, or at the very least my sanity. My son had done this. They finished their work, placing the empty can near the doorway. "Give it 10 minutes to air out," Tiffany said, cool as a cucumber. "Then we'll head out, circle the block, and come back. By the time we discover it, the whole back of the house should be engulfed." Daniel paused and looked around the room, a strange expression on his face. "What about Mom?" he asked, his voice low. Tiffany stepped up to him and put a hand on his cheek. "Don't go soft now, Danny. She'll be confused. We'll be the heroes who save her. The insurance pays out, the property is ours to sell, and she's safe with us where we can manage her affairs. It's the perfect plan. It's for the best." She kissed him, a short, triumphant peck. Then they slipped out of the room, leaving behind the invisible fumes and the silent recording eye of my camera. The video kept rolling on the empty room for another minute before it clicked off. The silence in Carol's living room was absolute. She had her arm around my shoulders, and I realized my entire body was shaking. Not from fear or from sadness. It was from the shock waves of the most profound betrayal a human being can experience. They didn't just burn down my house. They burned down my life, my memories, my love for my only child. And they were going to get away with it. Carol finally broke the silence. That monster," she whispered. "Elaine, we have to call the police, right now." I looked at her, and I'm sure my face was a scary sight. The tears were gone. The confused, fragile old woman was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, forged in the fire of that video. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "We are not calling the police. They have a story. They're heroes. I'm just a confused old lady with a head injury. Who do you think they'll believe? No, they think I have no memory. They think I'm helpless. We're going to let them keep thinking that." I looked from Carol's shocked face to the computer screen where the final frame of the video was frozen, my beautiful, doomed bedroom. A new plan began to form, a plan built on their arrogance and my supposed weakness. They wanted everything. Well, I'm going to make sure they get exactly what they deserve. Carol took a deep, shuddering breath, her professional IT instincts kicking in and overriding her initial shock. "First things first," she said, her voice low and serious as she ejected the memory card. "We make copies, plural." She pulled 2 brand new USB flash drives from a desk drawer. In minutes, she had copied the video file onto her computer, onto both drives, and then uploaded the original to a secure, password-protected cloud storage account she created for me. She wrote the login information on a slip of paper and handed it to me. "One of these drives stays with me," she said, holding up a small silver stick. "This one," she handed me a blue one, "you keep with you. Or better yet, put it somewhere incredibly safe. A bank safe deposit box would be best." I nodded, my mind a whirring engine of new and terrible thoughts. A safe deposit box. That was a good idea. I tucked the drive and the slip of paper deep into the zippered pocket of my purse. "Okay, Elaine," Carol said, turning her desk chair to face me. Her eyes were hard, but full of a fierce, protective loyalty that warmed me to my core. "What's the game plan? You get back in that car, you walk into that house, what are you going to do?"
I took a breath. I'm going to be the same woman who left this morning. Confused, a little sad, grateful for her wonderful son and daughter-in-law. The words felt like poison. I am going to thank Tiffany for the salmon cakes. I am going to ask Daniel if he's had a good day at work. I am going to play the part of a lifetime, Carol, because they've handed me the perfect costume, the helpless old woman with a faulty memory. Carol watched me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Be careful. They're dangerous. Not just greedy, they're capable of anything. I know, I said, and the simple truth of that statement hung in the air between us. But so am I. The drive back to the beige prison was excruciating. Carol and I practiced. We chatted about the bridge game, about who trumped whom, about the terrible cookies Marge had brought. We laughed. It sounded hollow and fake to my ears, but by the time Carol pulled up to the curb, the performance felt a little more natural. Tiffany opened the door before I was even out of the car, that brilliant false smile plastered on her face. There you are. Did you have a nice time, Elaine? Did you beat Carol? Oh, heavens no, I said, letting out a little laugh. I allowed myself to lean on her arm a bit as I walked up the path, playing up the frailness. Carol's a shark, but it was just so lovely to see everyone. Thank you again, sweetie. It was just what I needed. That evening at dinner, I looked across the table at their faces, at Daniel, who was complaining about a coworker, and at Tiffany, who was scrolling through her phone, occasionally murmuring, that's terrible, honey. I watched them eat the chicken I'd helped prepare, and all I could see was that red gas can. All I could hear was Tiffany saying, "Don't go soft now, Danny." I felt a detachment so profound it was almost an out-of-body experience. I was watching a television show, and these were the villains. And I, the unassuming protagonist, was about to write the final script. Life settled into a new, terrifying routine. I played my part. I was forgetful, asking the same question twice in an hour. I was docile, agreeing to whatever they suggested. I was grateful, constantly thanking them for their kindness. On the outside, I was their perfect patient, their burden, their project. But on the inside, I was a detective. I became a creature of observation. I learned their schedules. Daniel left for his sales job at exactly 7:45 a.m. and returned around 6 p.m. Tiffany's work was sporadic. She'd have furious bursts of typing and a few conference calls, but most of her day was spent at the gym, or shopping, or meeting friends for lunch. Her office, however, was shared with Daniel. It was their command center, and the door was almost always shut. I needed to get in there. My chance came about 2 weeks later. Tiffany had a very important video call. I could hear her from the living room, using her bright professional voice, talking about brand synergy and leveraging assets. I brewed a pot of tea and brought a cup to her, just as any thoughtful mother-in-law would do. "Oh, thank you, Elaine, they're a doll," she said, barely glancing at me as she smiled at her screen. "Just put it on the coaster." I set the cup down carefully on her pristine white desk. As I turned to leave, my sleeve, as if by accident, caught the edge of the mug. Hot tea cascaded across her desk, a brown tidal wave splashing onto her keyboard and her white linen trousers. She shrieked. It was not a pretty sound. "Oh my God, my laptop, my pants, they're brand new!" She leapt up, frantic, grabbing a box of tissues and dabbing uselessly at the mess. "Elaine, honestly," I put on my best flustered, horrified face. "Oh dear, I am so sorry. Oh, you poor thing. Let me help you." I made a show of grabbing for the sopping keyboard. No, just get out. Just go," she snapped, her mask of composure gone completely. She was talking to someone on her call. "I'm so sorry, Mike. I have a domestic emergency. I have to call you back." She practically shoved me out of the office and slammed the door. I scurried away, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. It had worked. I had my excuse. She was angry with me. She would be expecting me to lie low, to stay out of her way in my room feeling guilty, which is exactly what she didn't get. While she was in her bathroom, likely trying to salvage her $1,000 pants, I slipped back down the hall. I didn't go into the office. I went into their bedroom. Daniel had a habit of emptying his pockets on the dresser, and I'd noticed a set of keys that didn't belong to their cars or the house. One was a small, brass-colored key, a filing cabinet key. I returned to the office, my hands shaking. I dared not touch the desk. My target was the small, gray filing cabinet tucked in the corner. I tried the top drawer. Locked. The key from the dresser slid in and turned with a satisfying, oily click. Bingo!
I wasn't a snoop by nature, but now my survival depended on it. The files were meticulously organized. Car titles, bank statements, tax returns. I pushed past them, looking for one thing: homeowner's insurance. My name was on the tab. I pulled the folder. Inside was a copy of my policy, the one Frank and I had paid into for 35 years. And stapled to the inside cover was a printout of the claim status. My eyes scanned the page until I found the number. The payout was for $750,000. It was scheduled to be dispersed in 2 weeks, pending a final signature from me on a release form. And then I saw it, tucked in behind the claim form. A different set of papers, thick and full of legalese. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Durable Power of Attorney." They had filled it out completely. My name, Daniel's name as the agent. It would give him total and complete control over all my assets, my bank accounts, my retirement funds, my medical decisions, everything. All it needed was my signature and the signature of a notary. There was a sticky note attached to the front. It was in Tiffany's loopy handwriting. "Bernice at the bank will do this next Tuesday. Just tell her it's the insurance papers." They weren't just going to take the insurance money. They were going to take my entire life. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. I quickly took a photo of the claim status in every single page of the power of attorney document with the cheap smartphone Tiffany had bought for me. Another tool of control they'd given me, not realizing I could use it against them. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it, locked the cabinet, and tiptoed back to their room to return the key. By the time Tiffany emerged, red-faced and wearing a new pair of yoga pants, I was sitting in the living room looking at a gardening magazine, the picture of innocence. "I am so sorry about that, dear. I'm just so clumsy these days." She looked at me, and for a second, I thought she saw something in my eyes. But then her expression softened back into its usual patronizing mask. "It's fine, Elaine. Accidents happen." What she meant was, accidents happen when you're old and useless. She had no idea the real accident was her leaving those papers where I could find them. That afternoon, I called Carol. "I need another ride from Bridge next week," I said, knowing Tiffany was likely listening from the other room. "Marge wants to show me her new rose bushes." "Of course, honey," Carol said, playing along beautifully. "I'll be there." What I really needed was a lawyer, and I knew exactly who to call. Frank had played golf for 20 years with a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur wasn't just a lawyer. He was a shark in a tweed jacket, a semi-retired trial lawyer who took on cases not for the money, because he hated seeing bullies win. The following Wednesday, Carol picked me up and we drove straight to Arthur's downtown office. It was one of those old-fashioned places with wood paneling and leather chairs that smelled of books and justice. Arthur was in his late 70s with a shock of white hair and eyes that didn't miss a thing. "Elaine," he said, coming around his desk to give me a hug. "It's been too long. I was so sorry to hear about the fire. How are you holding up?" "I'm holding a winning hand, Arthur," I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him. "And I need your help to play it." For the next hour, Carol and I laid it all out. The fire, the memory loss, the move-in, the constant surveillance. I showed him the pictures of the power of attorney document. He became visibly angrier with each page. Then I slid Carol's silver USB drive across the polished surface of his desk. "What's this?" he asked. "This," I said, "is the ball game." He plugged it into his computer. We didn't say a word. We just watched his face as he watched the video. He leaned closer to the screen. His folksy, semi-retired demeanor vanished. His jaw tightened. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his desk. When the video ended and Tiffany kissed Daniel, a low, guttural sound escaped Arthur's throat. He leaned back in his chair and stared at me. The folksy grandpa was gone. In his place was the courtroom predator Frank used to talk about. "Elaine," he said, his voice quiet and deadly serious, "these people tried to kill you, and when that failed, they orchestrated a plan to steal everything you and Frank ever built. Our objective here is not just to send them to jail, it is to utterly and completely dismantle them. It is to leave them with nothing. Do you understand?" I looked him right in the eye. "Arthur," I said, "I want to be the one who turns the lights out on their entire life." A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Good. Now about that signature they need next Tuesday. I believe we can arrange a little surprise party at the bank." The days between that meeting and the following Tuesday were the longest and shortest of my life. Each hour I spent under their roof felt like an eternity. I had to smile at Tiffany when she talked about a sale at Nordstrom. I had to listen to Daniel complain about traffic. I had to eat their flavorless food and complimented on it. All while the video of them with that gas can was playing on a permanent loop in my head. My entire life became a performance. I was Meryl Streep going for her 4th Oscar.
Arthur's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He called it giving them enough rope. He explained that while the video was damning evidence for the arson, catching them red-handed in the act of trying to defraud me at the bank would add a whole new layer of federal charges. Bank fraud, wire fraud. These were not small-town offenses. It would make them look like calculated, professional criminals, not just a couple who made one bad decision. He'd spoken to the district attorney, who was apparently salivating at the case. He'd also spoken to a contact at my bank, the regional head of security, a woman who did not take kindly to people using her institution to fleece senior citizens. The notary, Bernice, had been a trusted bank employee for 30 years. Once she was brought into the loop by her superiors, she was horrified and eager to help. The stage was being set. My only job was to be the bait. Carol was my rock. We spoke every day. Our code was gardening. "Did you remember to water the roses?" meant, "Are you okay?" "The weeds are getting bad" meant, "I'm feeling the strain." "I'm putting down new fertilizer on Tuesday" was our confirmation that the plan was a go. On Monday night, I could barely sleep. I lay in their quiet, sterile guest room and thought of my son as a little boy, how he'd crawl into bed with me and Frank during thunderstorms, his small body trembling. "It's okay, buddy," I'd whisper, holding him tight. "Mommy's here. I'll always keep you safe." A tear, hot and bitter, slid down my temple and into my hair. Where did that little boy go? When did this cold, greedy monster take his place? I wasn't just mourning my house anymore. I was mourning my son, a death that had apparently happened years ago without me ever noticing. Tuesday morning arrived, gray and overcast. It suited my mood. Tiffany laid out one of my outfits for me, a particularly dreary beige knit pantsuit. "You want to look nice and respectable for the bank, Elaine," she said with a chirpy smile. I wanted to tell her that I'd prefer a jumpsuit of my own, perhaps in a festive orange, to match the one she and Daniel would soon be wearing. But I just smiled my meek little smile and said, "Of course, dear, whatever you think is best." In the car, Daniel was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He was trying to make small talk, but his mind was clearly on the $750,000 payout. "So, Mom, after we get this paperwork sorted, we can start looking at some nice condo options for you. Something secure with a nurse on site, maybe, so you won't have to worry about anything." "That sounds wonderful, honey," I said, looking out the window. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my voice was a placid like. He wasn't driving his frail mother to the bank, he was driving himself to the guillotine. "Don't go anywhere." Tiffany, in the passenger seat, turned around to face me. "And the best part is, with the power of attorney, Daniel can handle all the bills and investments for you. You know, with your memory being so spotty, it'll be such a relief not to have to deal with all that confusing financial stuff." "Such a relief," I repeated, my eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Her smile was wide and predatory. The condescension was so thick I could have choked on it. She thought I was a doddering old fool, a problem to be managed, a piggy bank to be smashed open. That was her second biggest mistake. Her biggest, of course, was the gasoline. We walked into the bank. It was cool and quiet, smelling of paper and money. Bernice sat at a small desk near the back, the brass nameplate in front of her gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She looked like a kindly-looking woman with glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up and gave us a warm smile, but I saw the flicker in her eyes when she looked at me, a brief flash of understanding and solidarity. "Daniel, Tiffany, so good to see you," she said, her voice betraying no hint of the drama about to unfold. "And this must be your mother, Elaine. It's a pleasure to meet you. I was so sorry to hear about your home." "Thank you, Bernice," I said softly, allowing Daniel to guide me into the chair. There were two other men in the bank besides the tellers. One was a young man in a tracksuit, fiddling with his phone. The other was a middle-aged man in a work shirt, reading a newspaper. Both were positioned with a clear view of Bernice's desk, Arthur's gardeners, ready to pull the weeds. Bernice laid the documents on the desk. The power of attorney was on top. "Okay, folks, this is all very straightforward. Daniel, you'll sign here as the agent. Tiffany, you'll sign here as a witness. And Elaine, I'll need your signature right here at the bottom of each page." Daniel could barely contain his excitement. He scribbled his name with a flourish. Tiffany signed with a little heart over the I in her name. Then it was my turn. Bernice pushed the papers and a pen toward me. This was it, the moment Arthur had coached me for. My hand trembled, but this time it wasn't an act. This was the point of no return. I looked down at the signature line. It was the last lie I would ever have to perform.
I picked up the pen, took a shaky breath, and looked up at my son. "Daniel," I said, my voice quiet and full of staged confusion, "are you sure about this? It all seems so complicated." "It's fine, Mom," he said, his voice a little tight. He was so close. He just needed my signature. "It's just a formality for the insurance. We're just making things easier for you." "For me?" I asked, letting my eyes get wide and watery. "Yes, for you," Tiffany cooed, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We love you. We're taking care of you." I looked from her perfectly manicured hand to my son's greedy, impatient face. I thought of my husband, of my home, of my cat, Patches, of the 40 years of memories they'd doused in gasoline. The performance was over. "That's funny,"
I said, my voice suddenly clear and cold as ice. The trembling stopped. I remember everything. I remember the red gas can. I remember you pouring it on my mother's curtains. I remember you, Tiffany, saying, "Don't go soft now, Danny." My security camera has a wonderful memory, too. In fact, its memory is now safely in the hands of the district attorney. Tiffany let out a choked gasp. Dangle just stared at me, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. The mask of the loving son didn't just crack, it disintegrated, revealing the hollow, panicked creature underneath. "Mom, you're confused. The fall—" "There's no confusion, Daniel," a new voice said. The two men, the gardeners, were on their feet and approaching the desk. They flipped open wallets to reveal gleaming badges. "Daniel and Tiffany Miller, you are both under arrest for attempted fraud, conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs." It happened so fast. One moment they were my powerful, benevolent caretakers, and the next they were criminals, pale-faced and trembling, being pushed against the wall. Tiffany started to sob, a loud, ugly, theatrical wail. "This is a misunderstanding. She's not well. She fell. She hit her head. Tell them, Daniel." But Daniel was silent. He was just staring at me, his face a mixture of hatred and absolute ruin. He had been so sure of my weakness. He had built his entire plan on it. And in one sentence, I had pulled the foundation out from under his whole world. As they cuffed him, his eyes never left mine. "How?" he whispered, a single word, full of disbelief. I met his gaze. The woman he saw was not the helpless victim he'd tried to create. I was the homeowner. I was the survivor. I was the matriarch of a family he just burned to the ground. "You forgot to check for the memory card. You were always careless with the details." The detectives led them away, a whimpering Tiffany and a shell-shocked Daniel. The bank was silent except for Tiffany's sobs echoing from the lobby. Bernice, the notary, reached across the desk and gently squeezed my hand. Arthur, who had been waiting in the bank manager's office, came out and put a steadying arm around my shoulder. "Step 1 is complete, Elaine," he said softly. I nodded, taking a deep, clean breath for what felt like a lifetime. The air no longer smelled of lies and manipulation. It smelled of justice. It was a good smell, but it was far from over. They were in custody, but the wreckage of my life was still smoldering. Now came the hard part. Rebuilding, and making sure that for every single thing they took from me, I took back too. Watching my only son and his wife get led away in handcuffs from a bank lobby is an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, or perhaps I would. At that moment, they were my worst enemies. As the police car pulled away from the curb, its lights flashing silently in the gray morning, I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt empty. The adrenaline that had been fueling me for 2 weeks drained away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. The fight was over, but the war for my own life had just begun. Arthur put a hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Elaine. Let's get you out of here." Carol was already at my other side, a human buttress holding me up. We walked out of the bank into the damp air, and I felt like a newborn colt on wobbly legs. I had no home, no family to speak of, and a suitcase full of beige clothes I despised. "What now?" I whispered, the words getting lost in the city noise. "Now," Arthur said with a voice that could calm a stampede, "we begin step 2, scorched earth."
It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The first thing we did was check me into a lovely residential hotel suite downtown, a place with a real kitchen, a comfortable couch, and a view of the city skyline. It was the antithesis of the beige box. Carol stayed with me for the first 2 nights, bless her heart. We didn't talk much about Daniel or Tiffany. Instead, we ordered pizza, watched old black and white movies, and drank a perhaps inadvisable amount of Chardonnay. It was a wake. We were mourning the life I'd lost and celebrating the life I had just narrowly reclaimed. The next few days were a blur of logistics.
Arthur had me sign a mountain of paperwork. The insurance company, once presented with a copy of the video and the police report, fast-tracked my claim with record speed. They were horrified and tripping over themselves to make it right. Suddenly, I wasn't a liability, a forgetful old woman who'd cost them money. I was the star victim in a fraud case they were now helping the DA prosecute. Funny how that works. Then came the meeting to change my will. Frank and I had a simple one: everything to each other, and upon the second passing, everything to our only son, Daniel. I sat with Arthur as he drafted the new one. It felt like I was carving my own heart out with a spoon, but I did it. I disinherited Daniel. Every penny, every stick of furniture, every last memory was to be divided among a few of Frank's favorite charities and my dearest friends. As I signed my name, I wasn't just cutting him out of my will. I was excising him from my soul. There was a finality to it that was both heartbreaking and liberating. The bail hearing was 2 days after the arrest. Arthur told me not to go, but I insisted. I needed to see them. I sat in the back of the courtroom, wearing a bright blue jacket Carol had bought for me, a small act of defiance. When they were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the reality of what had happened hit me. They looked small, pathetic. Tiffany's perfect blonde hair was limp and greasy. Her face, stripped of its makeup, was sallow and puffy from crying. Daniel looked like a ghost. He wouldn't look at me. Their court-appointed lawyer argued for bail, painting them as upstanding community members with no prior record. He talked about my concussion, my confused state. Then the prosecutor stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "Your Honor, the state would like to play a short video for the court." The judge agreed. And there on a big screen in the courtroom was the footage from my memory card, the grainy, silent images of my son and his wife with the gas can in my bedroom. You could have heard a pin drop. When it was over, the judge stared at Daniel and Tiffany for a long, cold moment. He said, "Bail is denied. I find you to be a significant and immediate danger to the community, and specifically to the victim in this case, your mother." He slammed his gavel down, and it felt like the final nail in their coffin. As they were led away, Tiffany started wailing again, a terrible animal sound. But this time, it didn't bother me. It sounded like justice. Of course, the local news got the story. Hero's son and wife accused of arson, attempted murder, and elaborate insurance scheme. There were pictures of them from their social media pages, smiling on a beach, clinking champagne glasses. Then there was the photo of me that the news had dug up from a church fundraiser, looking like a perfectly pleasant grandmother. The contrast was devastating. Tiffany's lifestyle blog and Instagram page, once her pride and joy, became a digital wasteland of furious comments. "I hope you enjoy your new beige box in prison," one person wrote. "Brand synergy with the devil," wrote another. Within a week, her entire online presence was deleted. Her career, built on a curated image of perfection and taste, had been incinerated as thoroughly as my house. Arthur's investigators, meanwhile, had dug into their finances. The picture that emerged was grimly predictable. Daniel had a failed tech startup he'd never told me about, funded by high-interest private loans. Tiffany had maxed out over a dozen credit cards trying to maintain the illusion of wealth for her followers. They were drowning, over $500,000 in debt. My house hadn't just been a nice bonus for them, it had been their life raft, and they were perfectly willing to sink me to save themselves. I was no longer just a victim of a fire, I was the architect of a reckoning. And the final bricks were about to be laid. You'll want to see this. With a mountain of evidence against them, their lawyer pushed them to take a plea deal, less jail time in exchange for admitting guilt. They refused. Tiffany was convinced she could charm a jury. Daniel, Arthur speculated, was simply too arrogant to admit defeat. So, we went to trial. It was a surprisingly short affair. The prosecutor laid out the case, piece by piece, the financial motive, the disabling of the smoke detector, the video. The star witness was, of course, the memory card. When the video was played for the jury, a woman in the front row gasped and put her hand over her mouth.
The defense was laughable. They tried to claim the gas can was for the lawnmower, that they were in the bedroom checking for a draft, that I was mentally incompetent, an unstable woman who was being manipulated by my greedy friend Carol.
They put me on the stand, and their lawyer tried to twist my words, to bring up my memory loss, to make me seem confused. He leaned forward and said in a syrupy, condescending tone, "Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that for over a month you believed you yourself started the fire? That your memory of the event is, shall we say, unreliable?" I looked at him, and then I looked at the jury. 12 normal people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. I spoke to them, not to the lawyer. "For a month, I lived in a prison of guilt," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I believed I had destroyed my own life. A person's memory isn't just a recording. It's tied to trust. I couldn't remember what happened, so I trusted what my only son told me. It turns out my memory wasn't the thing that was broken. It was my trust. It was my son. And once I saw that video, every single thing came back into focus." I saw a few of the jurors nod. The lawyer had no more questions after that. The guilty verdict came back in under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: arson in the first degree, insurance fraud, and the most serious charge, attempted murder. The sentencing was a month later. This was the day I had been waiting for. This was my moment. I stood at the podium to give my victim impact statement. I hadn't written anything down. The words were etched on my heart. I looked directly at Daniel, who was sitting at the defendant's table, hollow-eyed and thin. "There are 2 deaths I have to mourn," I began. "The first is the death of my home, the place where my husband and I built a life, where every corner held a memory of love and laughter. You took a gas can and you turned those memories to ash. You burned my wedding photos. You burned the letters my husband wrote me when he was stationed overseas. You burned the clay handprint a little 5-year-old boy made for me in kindergarten. A little boy who looked a lot like you, Daniel." His composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. I did not care. "But the second death is so much worse. It's the death of my son. The man sitting at that table is a stranger to me. My son would never have tried to murder his own mother for money. My son was kind. He was loving. This stranger is a greedy, cowardly monster who would rather burn his own mother alive than face up to his own failures." I turned my attention to Tiffany, who was weeping silently. "And you encouraged him. You coached him. You called it the perfect plan. You smiled in my face while you were plotting to destroy me. Of all the things you took, the thing I can never forgive is how you used my love for my son as a weapon against me." I looked back at the judge. "They didn't just try to kill me, Your Honor. They tried to erase me, to make me a non-person with a faulty mind whose life they could control and plunder. They failed. I am still here. I am not helpless. I am not confused. I am a survivor of their greed and their cruelty. And I ask you to give them a sentence that reflects the profound evil of what they did not only to me, but to the very idea of family." I walked back to my seat, my legs shaking, but my head held high. The judge looked down at the pair of them, his face a mask of disgust. He talked about the sanctity of family, about the horrific nature of their betrayal. He called their actions a chilling portrait of moral bankruptcy. He sentenced Tiffany to 20 years in prison. He sentenced Daniel, as the primary actor, to 25 years to life. A year has passed since that day. The insurance money, plus the results of a successful civil suit that Arthur helped me with, left me with more than enough to start over. I didn't rebuild on the old lot. That land was poisoned by memory. Instead, I bought a beautiful, bright corner apartment in a new building across town. It has a balcony that gets the morning sun, where I grow herbs and tomatoes in little pots. The walls are painted a cheerful yellow, and they're covered in new photos of my friends, of my travels. I took a cruise to Alaska last summer, and of my new cat, a feisty orange tabby named Frankie. I'm still in my bridge club. I volunteer at the local library twice a week. My life is full. It's quiet. It's mine. I get letters from Daniel, pages and pages of apologies and excuses. I don't read them. I just write "return to sender" on the envelope and put them back in the mail. He is no longer my son. He is just an inmate with my maiden name. I am free. And living well, I've found, is the most satisfying revenge of all. They thought I had lost my memory, but in the end, I remembered the most important thing, who I am. Now, I'd love to hear from you all in the comments. I've told you my story, the whole ugly, unbelievable truth. So my question for you is, what would you have done in my place?
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.